20-year-old University of Mississippi student Jimmy J. Lee vanished on July 8, 2022. He's never been found, but he was declared legally dead after it became apparent based on the evidence that he's most likely no longer alive. After examining cell phone, social media, and internet search records, authorities arrested 24-year-old Sheldon Timothy Herrington Jr. on a capital murder charge. According to prosecutors, Herrington killed Lee because they were having an intimate relationship and he was afraid of being outed. Herrington has maintained his innocence throughout the case. His defense attorney urged that there was zero proof that Lee was even killed in the first place, while the state claimed that the evidence would prove that Herrington killed Lee. During the trial in December 2024, a friend of Lee's testified that on the day Lee vanished, he mentioned an intimate encounter with a man that had gone wrong. When the friend spoke with Lee shortly before 6 a.m., he revealed that he was on his way back to the man's apartment. This fell in line with a Snapchat conversation between Herrington and Lee from around the same time that morning. Herrington had sent Lee a message stating, "Come back," along with another text letting him know that the door was open. A short while later, Herrington Googled, "How long does it take to strangle someone?" Not long after that, a car matching the description of Lee's vehicle was seen driving around the city of Oxford. While testifying in his own defense, Herrington admitted that he had initially given police false statements about the nature of his relationship with Lee, but he stood by his claim that he had nothing to do with Lee's disappearance or death. Prosecutors are not seeking the death penalty, but if Herrington is convicted as charged, he'll face a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Number 14. Kathryn Restelli. Shortly after 10 p.m. one night in July of 2024, 42-year-old Matthew Restelli pulled into the driveway of his mother-in-law's American Fork, Utah home after driving there from California. Just 1 minute after his arrival, he was shot 7 times in an ambush of gunfire. According to investigators, Matthew's wife, 36-year-old Kathryn, and his mother-in-law, 59-year-old Tracy Grist, had lured the victim to the property for the express purpose of killing him. Detectives found a tracking device on his vehicle indicating that the women tracked his movements in preparation for his arrival. The shooting was carried out by Kathryn's brother, 33-year-old Kevin Stanley Ellis, who initially insisted that he had acted in self-defense. But the evidence at the crime scene pointed toward a shoddy attempt at covering up a murder. For one, a knife was found next to Matthew's right hand, but he was left-handed, leading investigators to suspect that his killers had planted the weapon in an attempt to legitimize Ellis's self-defense claim. Additionally, Kathryn went on a date the very next day and allegedly told people that she was glad her husband was dead. All 3 suspects are being held without bond at the Utah County Jail on murder charges, along with conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Number 13. Matthew Ecker.
And then she just grabbed the gun.
In December 2022, 45-year-old Matthew Ecker dialed 911 and reported that his girlfriend had been shot inside her St. Paul, Minnesota apartment. Officers arrived at the scene to find 32-year-old registered nurse Alexandra Pennig dead on her bathroom floor with a single gunshot wound to the head. Ecker, who was also a nurse, claimed to have no involvement in the incident. He and Pennig had met at work 2 years earlier and had seen each other intimately since then, but they had an open relationship, and Pennig had another boyfriend. During questioning, Ecker claimed that Pennig had called him over to the apartment, claiming that her other boyfriend had abused her. Ecker went over to the residence and they went to 3 bars together. At one point, they ran into the other boyfriend, resulting in a physical altercation between the 2 men, and the other boyfriend was kicked out of the bar. In surveillance footage from shortly after 2 in the morning, Ecker and Pennig appeared visibly frustrated after pulling into the parking lot of Pennig's apartment building. Ecker claimed that once they entered Pennig's apartment, she stole his gun out of his backpack and ran into the bathroom with it. At the residence, police found several bottles of psychiatric medication, causing them to wonder if Ecker was telling the truth. But there was other evidence at the scene which indicated the likelihood of foul play. Additionally, Ecker's story kept changing in major ways, further pointing toward the likelihood that he was being dishonest. Based on the findings of their investigation, authorities charged Ecker in connection with Pennig's death. In February 2024, he was found guilty of second-degree murder with intent. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 12, Richard Taylor. After exuding an image of stability and success to his wife, parents, and the rest of his family for many years, 42-year-old Canadian elementary school teacher Richard "Rich" Taylor could no longer hide his perilous financial state. He was in $235,000 of debt and on the brink of losing his home. Unbeknownst to his wife, Evangelia, the couple's credit cards were maxed out and they were late on all their loan payments. Just days before a planned vacation to Greece in July of 2018, Rich asked to borrow money from his brother Chris and his mother, 64-year-old Carla Rutherford. Chris said no, while Carla loaned him $500 and said she needed it back the next day. At 3 a.m. the next morning, an intruder entered the Dundas, Ontario home of Carla and her husband and Rich's stepfather, 63-year-old Alan Rutherford. The suspect snuck into the couple's bedroom while they were fast asleep, doused the room in an accelerant, and threw a lit match, causing the house to quickly become engulfed in flames. Alan jumped out a window but went back inside to try rescuing Carla, who was still in the house, and the couple's 2 dogs. He managed to rescue one of the dogs, but was unable to save his wife. By the time Alan exited the house again, 95% of his body was covered in catastrophic burns. He ran to a neighbor for help while burned skin slipped off his body. When emergency responders arrived, Alan identified Richard as the culprit and stated that the crime was financially motivated. In the meantime, firefighters went inside to try rescuing Carla, who was burned beyond recognition. They were unable to save her, and it was pretty clear that Alan wasn't going to survive either. Understanding the importance of gathering evidence before it was too late, police spoke with Alan, who spent the last hour of his life explaining what had happened. Investigators had no difficulty uncovering evidence of Rich's money problems, leading to the suspicion that he killed his mother and stepfather in order to obtain a $400,000 inheritance. Rich pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder, arguing in court that he had the money to catch up on his debts but simply was in no hurry to do so. Additionally, as his lawyer put it, being bad with money didn't make him a killer. The prosecution made it a point to demonstrate the extent of Rich's money issues by showing that he had been living wildly outside his means for several years, while keeping it a total secret from his wife. 4 years after the double homicide, the jury found Rich guilty as charged, and he received the maximum sentence of 25 years to life. He appealed the case just days after his sentencing hearing, but remains behind bars. Number 11, Michael Roseboro. Like many people who grow up in small towns, funeral director Michael Roseboro went into his family's business after high school and remained in the same area where he had grown up. He married his wife, Jan, started a family, and socialized with other residents in the tight-knit town of Denver, which is home to just a population of 3,000. But the Roseboro family's seemingly idyllic existence fell apart on July 22, 2008, when Michael dialed 911 and reported that he had found Jan unresponsive in their swimming pool. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but it was too late to save the 45-year-old woman's life. The couple's friends and family were quick to believe that Jan's death was a terrible accident, and Michael was initially extremely cooperative with investigators, but suspicions arose during Jan's autopsy, when the pathologist discovered evidence of strangulation along with bruises all over Jan's scalp, indicating that she had also been bludgeoned. He classified the woman's death as a homicide, changing the entire course of the investigation. Detectives' suspicions were heightened when Michael showed a minimal reaction to the news that someone had murdered his wife. That same day, a tipster told law enforcement that Michael was having an affair with a 38-year-old married woman named Angela Funk. The tryst had only been going on for 7 weeks, and the two had already started making plans to spend their future together. The deeper investigators dug, the more it appeared as though Michael killed Jan in order to get her out of the picture so he could carry on his affair with Funk in an uncomplicated fashion.
How do you know Mike Roseboro?
About 5 years ago, he introduced me. We were at a parade, and he introduced himself. And we just finally been acquaintances till about 2 months ago.
Which parade would that be?
I have no idea. I don't remember it. He's the one that told me. I don't remember. And I'd see him here and there, and say hi or whatever. And then about 2 months ago, he called the house.
How would he have gotten your phone number?
It's listed.
Just called like out of the blue?
Well, yeah, because I would see him at Turkey Hill in the morning if I got coffee or, stuff like that.
So he knew your name?
Yeah, like he knew my name, yeah.
So he calls you one day,
Mm-hmm.
kind of out of the blue, and what does he say?
He just said he can't stop thinking of me. We never got to talk.
Did you know he was married at that time?
Yeah.
Meaning that, just in conversation with him, like a Turkey Hill?
It's the Roseboro, so yeah.
And he knew you were married?
Yeah.
Prosecutors charged him with murder and he stopped talking to law enforcement. Michael maintained his innocence, but in September 2009, a jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, landing him an automatic life sentence without parole. Number 10, Lee Byer.
What's the area CID?
Okay.
Can you just confirm your name for me, please, sir?
Mr. Byer.
Mr. Byer.
Yeah.
I'm arresting you in suspicion of the murder of Mr. Thomas Halloran on the
That's what
16th.
you're talking about.
On the 16th of August, 2022. Okay. You don't have to say anything.
Just days after his release from prison, in August of 2022, after serving a 12-year sentence for robbery, 45-year-old Lee Byer stabbed an elderly man to death on the streets of London in an unprovoked broad daylight attack. The fatal encounter occurred shortly after 4 p.m. when Byer spotted 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran on his mobility scooter and assaulted him for no apparent reason. By the time emergency responders arrived, Byer had fled. O'Halloran was pronounced dead at the scene and a manhunt was launched in an effort to locate the fugitive killer. Corrections employees recognized Byer as a recently released parolee. When officers arrived at his home to arrest him, Byer claimed he was still in prison on the day of O'Halloran's death. Surveillance footage proved otherwise, however, with security video showing Byer and O'Halloran entering the same alleyway. A few minutes later, Byer emerged from the alleyway alone with a knife in his hand. He ditched the weapon in the storm drain, and a search of his home turned up evidence indicating that he had tried burning his clothes after O'Halloran's murder. When Byers claimed that he was still in prison failed to sway law enforcement into believing he was innocent, he told investigators that he was in his yard or at a park. He denied being the man in the surveillance footage, despite clothing matching the outfit in the video being found in his home. Byers' mental health had raised concerns starting in 2020. When he reported hearing voices. In 2024, he admitted to manslaughter by diminished responsibility and was hospitalized indefinitely. Number 9. Stacey Castor.
I hate my mother for ruining so many people's lives. I didn't even know why she did it. All those things she took away from me. She killed 2 people and tried to kill me and blame it on me and blame me for the other deaths.
In August 2005, David Castor fell mysteriously ill and died at the home he shared with his wife Stacey in Onondaga County, New York. His death came just a handful of years after Stacey's first husband, Michael Wallace, who had succumbed to similar strange symptoms in 1999. Investigators had already suspected Stacey of having a hand in Wallace's death, and when David died, they became even more suspicious. In 2007, 2 years after David's death, Stacey strongly encouraged her daughter, Ashley Wallace, to drink a cocktail she had made. Ashley found her mother's behavior odd, but she drank the beverage. A short while later, Ashley's sister found her comatose and dialed 911. Thankfully, the young woman survived. Doctors discovered that Ashley had ingested a dangerous mix of pills that had been stirred into her drink. They concluded that if help had arrived even a few minutes later, Ashley would have died. Emergency responders had found a remorseful note beside the young woman confessing to the murders of David Castor and Michael Wallace, but they did not believe that Ashley had written it. In fact, they did not suspect Ashley of having anything to do with the murders, and they were convinced that she was a victim herself. Investigators suspected that Stacey had tried to kill her daughter with plans to make it look as though Ashley had taken her own life in a state of guilt over having killed her father and her stepfather. In other words, authorities believed that Stacey tried to murder Ashley and to frame her for the murders of her husbands. Ashley's version of events corroborated with a growing body of evidence against her mother. She told investigators that Stacey had invited her over to drink together and that she had said yes because Stacey was both her mother and her best friend. It was the first time Stacey ever made a drink for Ashley, and Ashley described the beverage as nasty, but said she drank it anyway, which was the last thing she remembered before blacking out. While nobody was ever brought to justice for Michael Wallace's death, Stacey Castor was convicted convicted of second-degree murder in connection with the death of her second husband, David. She was also convicted of attempted murder for trying to kill her own daughter. Stacey faced at least a half-century behind bars before she would become eligible for parole at the age of 87, but she died in her prison cell from a heart attack in 2016. Number 8. Andrea Sneiderman. 36-year-old Rusty Sneiderman was gunned down in cold blood outside his son's daycare in Dunwoody, Georgia in November 2020. He died from his injuries, and his murder shocked the community. From the outside looking in, Rusty and his wife, 35-year-old Andrea, seemed to have a perfect marriage and life. They both had good jobs, a nice home, an abundant support system, and healthy children. At a lack of other directions to go in, detectives asked Andrea if she and Rusty had any financial or marital problems which might have caused someone to want her husband dead. Andrea claimed that her boss, Hemi Neumann, had hit on her, but that she had immediately shut it down. This turned out to be a complete lie. In reality, Andrea was entangled in a full-blown affair with Neumann. In the meantime, investigators traced the shooter's van to Neumann, who had rented the vehicle in his own name. During questioning, Neumann did not admit to or deny killing Rusty. He eventually admitted to shooting the victim, but argued in court that he deserved leniency due to mental illness. Prosecutors accused him of faking schizophrenia and executing Rusty in hopes of pursuing a deeper relationship with Andrea. The state also alleged that Neumann hoped to get his hands on Rusty's $2 million life insurance policy. In February 2012, a jury found Neumann guilty of murder but mentally ill. He was sentenced to life in prison. Andrea went on trial the following year for more than a dozen charges, including lying under oath, perjury, and hindering the investigation into Rusty's murder. She was found guilty of 9 out of 13 counts and received a 5-year prison sentence. Number 7. Angel Vause. Brittany Drexel vanished in 2009 after traveling from upstate New York to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, with some friends for spring break. More than a decade later, her remains were found in Harmony Township, roughly 160 miles from where she was last seen alive. Police were led to Drexel's body by a 62-year-old man named Raymond Moody, who confessed to killing the young woman and was charged with her murder. He revealed that he had strangled Drexel to death the morning after she was last seen alive. Moody pleaded guilty to murder, kidnapping, and criminal misconduct and is serving a life term, followed by 2 consecutive 30-year sentences. Both Moody and his longtime girlfriend, 56-year-old Angel Cooper Vause, had been questioned back in 2011, but law enforcement didn't have enough evidence to arrest them at the time. During this initial round of questioning and a second interview in 2022, Vause made no mention of ever having met Drexel. She finally admitted she was at the scene when the murder took place following Moody's arrest. Vause said that she was with Moody when they saw Drexel walking down the street and asked her if she wanted to party. Drexel got into the car with the couple, who drove to the campground where the murder took place. Federal prosecutors charged Drexel with numerous counts pertaining to her dishonesty, including making a false statement to a federal agent. She was also accused of dumping Drexel's cell phone in a bid to conceal evidence. In September 2024, Vause pleaded guilty to making a false statement to a federal agent. She's currently awaiting sentencing and is reportedly facing up to 24 years in prison, along with a fine of up to $250,000. Number 6. Sherelle Maxwell. On January 10, 2021, police responded to the scene of a reported shooting at a home in Wichita Falls, Texas, where they found Samantha Hardesty and Curtis Day suffering from bullet wounds. They died from their injuries, and investigators began working to solve the case. A witness, Sherelle Maxwell, told officers that she didn't see who committed the shooting, but that her boyfriend, Patrick Osborne, had left the house shortly before the incident. She claimed that Osborne had gone to the store, but further investigation indicated that he was not only at the residence when the shooting occurred, but that he was likely the killer. Under pressure from detectives, Osborne eventually admitted to his role in the crime. Based on the information gleaned from the discussion, it became evident that Maxwell had lied to law enforcement about Osborne not being present at the scene. Osborne facing charges of murder and aggravated assault, while Maxwell was charged with making a false report to police. The case appears to be ongoing. Number 5. Jayne Hill. While working as a caretaker for an elderly woman in Wirral, England, in March of 2024, 52-year-old Jayne Hill got greedy and started stealing money and jewelry from the client. The theft was captured on surveillance video, leaving her with the dilemma of figuring out how to conceal the crime. Upon learning about the footage, Hill's employer suspended her despite her insistence that she had done nothing wrong. Late one evening the following month, Hill waited outside the home of the client, 90-year-old Myra Thompson, until all the lights had been turned off for the night. She then entered the residence and struck Thompson over the head with a metal flask, then smothered the senior citizen to death with a pillow. Hill was charged with Thompson's murder despite her efforts to make herself appear uninvolved, and she pleaded guilty to later that year. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 22.5 years. Number 4. Marley Barberian. In November 2018, a 23-year-old Florida woman named Marley Jane Barberian was arrested for falsely accusing a Palm Beach County deputy of assaulting her. She had reported the alleged incident earlier that year while being booked into jail after being arrested for shoplifting in Green Acres. Barberian claimed that the deputy who transported her to the jail had pulled over on the side of the road. She also accused the cop of groping her while patting her down during her arrest at a Target store, where she had been caught trying to steal around $70 worth of merchandise. According to an arrest affidavit, Barberian acted out of control at various points throughout the arrest and booking process. At one point, she reportedly banged her head against a wall repeatedly. After reviewing body cam footage of the ordeal and results from a medical exam, the deputy's superiors cleared him of any wrongdoing. In April 2019, Barberian pleaded guilty to falsely accusing a member of law enforcement of assault. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with credit for time served, and was released in 2022. Number 3. Fabiola Robles.
Okay? Because all I hear is, I'm gonna be dying.
Well, maybe they were playing, like, joking around. Did it sound like somebody was hurting somebody else, or that when we saw back there, there's just kids playing on a water slide. They're playing.
In June of 2023, 47-year-old Fabiola Robles was arrested in Volusia County, Florida for calling 911 and falsely claiming that her neighbor was drowning their child. She repeated the statement and provided a dispatcher with the location of the alleged incident along with other pertinent details. After having their patrol car T-boned while en route to the scene, deputies finally reached the address and spoke with the neighbor, who explained that Robles had been complaining all day about his children making noise while playing in the backyard. Contrary to the woman's claims, it seemed impossible for any of the kids to be drowning while outdoors because there was no pool. When questioned about whether she actually saw someone drowning, Robles admitted that she hadn't. She then made it clear that she was upset about the noise, which wouldn't be a problem for the rest of the day since she was taken to the Volusia County Jail on suspicion of misuse of 911. Records show that she was convicted of the charge and is currently serving an 18-month prison sentence. Today's topic was requested by Tamika Davis, 6641. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2, Monia Tabon. 27-year-old Ashley McLean of Glen Olden, Pennsylvania, was returning home from a night out with friends in August of 2023 when, for reasons that are unclear, she stepped out of the car she was in and stepped into oncoming traffic at 2:30 a.m. She was fatally struck by a vehicle and the driver fled the scene. About an hour later, 43-year-old Monia Tabon called 911 and claimed that her rental car had been stolen. Police found the car in Philadelphia, but it bore no signs of forced entry or being stolen. But there was heavy damage to the windshield, and at that point it wasn't very difficult for investigators to put 2 and 2 together. Based on the circumstances and information available to them at the time, police deduced that Tabon probably wasn't the hit-and-run driver, but she likely knew who was driving the car at the time of the wreck. She reportedly changed her story a few times and was unable to provide an alibi for her whereabouts when the crash occurred. Tabon was arrested on several charges, including filing a false police report. In the meantime, authorities identified the suspected hit-and-run driver, 31-year-old Domir Brown. In March of 2024, Brown pleaded guilty to vehicular homicide, accident involving death, false report, and evading arrest or detention on foot. He was sentenced to 3.5 to 8 years in prison. 2 months later, Tabon pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of filing a false report. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation. Stick around after number 1 if you'd also like to watch our release about when betraying your country goes wrong. If you enjoyed this episode, then that one should be right up your alley as well. Number 1. Sherell Story. On March 5th, 2021, 28-year-old Chicago resident Sherell Y. Story called 911 and made a false kidnapping report against her husband. She claimed that a relative was being held against their will inside a white conversion van. Police located the vehicle and attempted to pull it over, but the driver led law enforcement on a chase. The pursuit ended when the suspect, 36-year-old Stephen J. Southern, crashed the van. He exited the vehicle and fled into a nearby residence, but surrendered a short while later and was taken into custody without further incident. Southern was charged with aggravated fleeing and eluding, possession of cannabis, and traffic infractions. In the meantime, investigators took a deeper look into Story's kidnapping claim and discovered that it was completely false. They had started to suspect that the woman had lied when Southern was the only person in the van during the traffic stop. In February 2022, Story was charged with disorderly conduct for filing the false report. The outcome of the case is unclear. Before enlisting in the U.S. Navy in 1955, John Anthony Walker Jr. dropped out of high school in Scranton, Pennsylvania after attempting a burglary. He was threatened with jail time unless he joined the armed forces, so he did just that, starting a career as a Navy communications specialist that spanned nearly 2 decades. While he was stationed on the nuclear-powered submarine USS Andrew Jackson in Charleston, South Carolina, Walker became saddled with delinquent debts following a failed attempt to open a bar. In 1967, as the pressures of his financial troubles as well as his flailing marriage intensified, Walker went to the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. and offered to sell information in exchange for cash rewards. Operating as a Soviet spy for the remainder of his career, the man would leave photographed and photocopied cryptographic keys and other sensitive materials in anonymous locations for his foreign contacts to collect. Upon retiring from the Navy in 1976, Walker started a private detective business. However, he continued to collect classified documents from his brother, a retired lieutenant commander who worked for a defense contractor, his son, a petty officer assigned to a nuclear aircraft, as well as a Navy radio man named Jerry Whitworth. In May of 1985, Walker was finally tracked down by federal authorities and arrested after his ex-wife and one of his daughters went to the FBI with information about his spying. He and each of the members of his ring were taken into custody and charged with passing along state secrets to Soviet operatives. The New York Times reported in 1990 that intelligence experts had estimated that Walker provided enough code data information to significantly alter the balance of power between Russia and the United States. In exchange for a lighter sentence, his son Walker ultimately agreed to plead guilty and provide a detailed account of the material he'd sent to the Soviets. He was given a life sentence but passed away on August the 28th of 2014, the year before he would have been eligible for parole. His son was sentenced to 25 years behind bars but was released in 2000. Walker's brother received 3 life sentences and ultimately died while incarcerated at the Butner Federal Correctional Complex in North Carolina. Jerry Whitworth received the brunt of the legal consequences for the spy ring's illicit activities, including a $410,000 fine and a 365-year prison sentence. Number 6. Harold T. Martin III. In 2016, while investigating the hacker group known as the Shadow Brokers, the FBI was alerted by the National Security Agency to a Twitter post uploaded by a computer scientist working at a Department of Defense facility in Alexandria, Virginia. The man, identified as Harold T. Martin III, had used an anonymous Twitter account to contact Kaspersky Lab, a Russian multinational cybersecurity firm. Using information provided by Kaspersky researchers, the FBI obtained a search warrant for Martin's home in Glen Burnie, Maryland. A SWAT team broke down his front door with a battering ram, deployed flashbangs, and removed the suspected cybercriminal at gunpoint. Inside the residence, federal investigators, in conjunction with the Maryland State Police, found more than 50 terabytes of classified information from the National Security Agency. Martin had reportedly stolen the sensitive data by simply walking out of various government facilities with it in his possession. According to the resulting criminal indictment, the man stole materials from the CIA, NSA, U.S. Cyber Command, the Department of Defense, and the National Reconnaissance Office over a period of 10 to 20 years. Martin's defense team argued that he suffered from mental health issues of which his actions were a symptom. Investigators found it difficult to conclusively determine if Martin's data theft was for the purpose of international espionage or digital hoarding, which the defense contended. Nevertheless, he was charged with willful retention of national defense information, changing his plea on multiple occasions before ultimately pleading guilty in March of 2019. A few months later, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison, 3 of which would be subtracted for time served, plus 3 years of probation and a fine of $250,000. As of recent updates, Martin was incarcerated at Federal Medical Center in Devens, Massachusetts, a facility that houses inmates with ongoing physical or mental health treatment needs. Number 5. Jerry Chun-Shing Lee. A former CIA officer was arrested in New York in January of 2018 after it emerged that he'd served as a confidential informant for the Chinese government for several years. Jerry Chun-Shing Lee was a naturalized U.S. citizen who initially joined the CIA back in 1994 after serving in the Army. Lee reportedly worked under diplomatic cover in Asia, as well as at the agency's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Frustrated by his lack of career advancement, he left the CIA in 2007 and began working at Japan Tobacco International, where he served as part of a team of investigators tracking cigarette smuggling and counterfeiting. Executives at Japan Tobacco eventually began to suspect Lee of sending information about the company's investigations to corrupt Chinese officials. He was consequently terminated in 2009, and the following year the FBI received word of his suspicious foreign contacts. When federal authorities subsequently began investigating Lee, it was discovered that he possessed 2 notebooks that contained the identities of Chinese nationals working for the CIA and other highly classified details. It was suspected that Lee's close ties to the Asian country may have played a role in the dismantling of the agency's network of operatives in China started in 2010. A Justice Department press release detailed how the former CIA officer transmitted national defense information to Chinese intelligence officers in exchange for hundreds of thousands of dollars. In May of 2019, Lee pleaded guilty to his charges, and in November he was sentenced to 19 years in prison for his crimes. Number 4. Nadia Antonova. Following the liberation of Katovska, a Ukrainian village in rural Kharkiv province, in May of 2022, a team of elite special forces troops and intelligence agents descended on the decimated community to arrest the local council secretary accused of high treason. Court records revealed that the suspect, Nadia Antonova, had rendered significant aid to Russian forces in their attempts to stifle rebellion in the area. She was specifically accused of handing over the names of law enforcement specialists who would have served as the backbone of local resistance efforts. She also allegedly revealed the identities of hunters and park rangers whose knowledge of the countryside would have made them perfect partisan fighters. Furthermore, prosecutors alleged that Antonova forced the residents of Katovska to wear white armbands in support of the Russians. Ukrainian special forces entered the town inside an unmarked car and took Antonova into custody as part of a dramatic nationwide blitz of traitors and turncoats accused of helping Russian invaders. Number 3. Tyrod Nathan Webster Pugh. On January the 10th of 2015, U.S. Air Force veteran Tyrod Nathan Webster Pugh traveled to Turkey, where he sought to cross the border into Syria and join forces with the Islamic State in its efforts to engage in violent jihad. The man was denied entry by Turkish authorities, who found him to be in possession of a laptop, as well as 4 USB drives that had been stripped of their plastic casings in order to destroy their contents. Pugh was quickly deported back to the US, where he was placed under close watch by the FBI. On January the 16th, he was arrested in Asbury Park, New Jersey, on suspicion of attempting to provide material support to ISIS. His laptop reportedly indicated that he'd conducted internet searches for borders controlled by Islamic State. The device also contained an ISIS propaganda film, as well as execution videos made by the extremist group. It subsequently emerged that the former Air Force mechanic had penned a letter shortly before his travels to Turkey, in which he stated in part, "I am a mujahid. There is only two possible outcomes for me, victory or martyr." In March of 2016, Pugh was convicted at trial and consequently sentenced to 35 years in prison. Number 2. Jonathan and Diana Toby. In October of 2021, a West Virginia couple was taken into federal custody following an FBI investigation into allegations that they were selling state secrets to foreign entities. The resulting criminal complaint identified the suspects as Jonathan and Diana Toby, both in their 40s. The former worked as a nuclear engineer for the U.S. Navy and was accused of abusing his privileged position to obtain information about the design of nuclear-powered warships, which he and his wife then offered to the highest bidder. In April of 2020, the Tobys mailed a foreign government a package containing a sample of restricted data and instructions for establishing a covert relationship. According to the Justice Department, over the months that followed, they were also said to have transferred multiple SD cards worth of restricted data to their foreign contact. On one occasion, hiding the device in half a peanut butter sandwich left at an agreed-upon location. Unbeknownst to the Tobys, the foreign operative with whom they'd been conducting the illicit transactions was actually an undercover FBI agent. Both Jonathan and Diana were charged with espionage-related offenses to which they pleaded guilty in August of 2022. 3 months later, the former Navy engineer was sentenced to 232 months, over 19 years behind bars. His wife was sentenced to 262 months, or nearly 22 years in prison for the national betrayal. Number 1. Ukrainian traitor. In September of 2022, reports surfaced that the counterintelligence unit of the Security Service of Ukraine arrested an unidentified woman on suspicion of sending the coordinates of Ukrainian army positions to the Russians. Shortly after the invasion, the 32-year-old suspect, who resided in a village in a border area of Chernihiv Oblast, reportedly established contact with Russian officials. She continued her communications with the occupiers even after the Chernihiv Oblast was liberated. Between August and September, the woman obtained sensitive military information, including the locations of ammunition and weapons storage sites and the locations of checkpoints, as well as movements of military convoys. She then transferred the data she'd collected to the Russians by way of a messenger app, for which she was compensated with a cash reward. Ukrainian law enforcement conducted a search of the suspected traitor's home and found multiple communication devices, some of which contained evidence of messages she'd exchanged with a Russian Secret Service representative. Thanks for watching. Hypothetically, from now on out, would you rather never be able to tell the truth anymore or never be able to lie anymore, and why? Let us know in the comments section below.